The clock on the clubhouse wall ticked past, 1:15 a.m., its hands glowing faintly under the dim neon sign that flickered like a dying heartbeat. Outside, the desert wind howled through the empty lots of Iron Promise territory, carrying the sharp scent of sagebrush and distant rain. Asher Ghost Valente sat alone at the scarred oak bar, nursing a half-empty bottle of whiskey, the kind that burned slow and left echoes of old regrets. His leather cut hung heavy on his shoulders, patched with the faded emblem of the Iron Promise, a coiled serpent promising unbreakable bonds. At 42, Ghost had seen enough shadows to know the night never lied. It just whispered truths you weren't ready to hear. The door burst open with a rattle of chains, slamming against the wall like a gunshot in the silence. A girl no older than 12 stumbled in, her dark hair tangled and wild, eyes wide, with the kind of terror that etched lines into a child's face too soon. Riley Chen clutched the doorframe, her small frame shivering in a threadbare jacket that smelled of smoke and fear. Behind her, the gravel crunched under hurried footsteps, but she didn't look back. "Hide, my aunt!" she gasped, her voice a broken plea that cut through the stale air like a knife. "Please, they're coming!" Ghost's hand froze mid-reach for his glass. His code was ironclad, forged in the fires of too many lost brothers. Don't get tangled in messes that ain't yours. He'd walked away from bar fights, family feuds, even the ghosts of his own war-torn past. But this girl, Riley, though he didn't know her name yet, stood there, a fragile anchor in the storm, her plea hanging between them like an unspoken vow. He rose slowly, boots thudding against the worn floorboards, the creak of leather filling the room. The wind pushed at the door, threatening to swing it shut, but he held it open, peering into the darkness. A woman emerged from the shadows, staggering forward as if the night itself were chasing her. Mei Chen, though Ghost would learn that later, was in her late 30s. Her once neat blouse torn at the shoulder, faint bruises blooming like dark flowers on her pale skin, signs of aggression that spoke of hands too rough, words too cruel. She pressed a thick manila folder to her chest, fingers white-knuckled around it, as if it were the only shield between her and oblivion. Her breath came in ragged bursts, mingling with the metallic tang of blood from a split lip. Riley darted to her side, wrapping tiny arms around her waist, but May's eyes locked on Ghost's, pleading without words. We didn't know where else," she whispered, her voice trembling like leaves in the gale. Ghost's jaw tightened. The clubhouse, this sanctuary of roaring engines and sworn oaths, wasn't a haven for strangers. Iron Promise had rules, etched deeper than tattoos. Protect your own, ride for the club, leave the world's rot at the gate. But as May stepped inside, the folder slipping just enough to reveal glimpses of typed pages, names in bold, figures in red ink, words like embezzlement and cover-up staring back at him, something shifted. Corruption, the kind that festered in high places, the kind that swallowed good people whole. He'd seen it before, in the boardrooms that funded wars and the badges that turned blind eyes. If he shut that door, they'd vanish into the night, and the desert would keep their secrets. No questions asked, no honor gained. He stepped aside, the door creaking wider under his grip. "Get in!" he growled, his voice low and steady, like the rumble of a Harley idling at dawn. Riley pulled her aunt inside, the girl's face a mask of fragile relief as the door thudded shut behind them. The lock clicked with finality, sealing out the wind, but inviting in a storm of its own. Ghost's code cracked like dry earth under boot heels. By opening that door, he'd chosen something bigger, a promise not yet spoken, but one that would bind him to these strangers like blood. May collapsed onto a stool, the folder thumping onto the bar as she buried her face in her hands. Riley hovered close, her small hand stroking her aunt's back in silent comfort. The air thickened with the scent of fear sweat and old wood polish, the neon buzzing overhead like a swarm of angry bees. Ghost poured 2 glasses of water from a pitcher behind the bar, sliding them across without a word. His mind raced, piecing together the fragments, the girl's urgency, the woman's wounds, the documents that reeked of betrayal. Who were they running from? Cops with dirty hands? Suits pulling strings from glass towers? It didn't matter yet. What mattered was the weight settling in his chest, the echo of a long-forgotten oath from his days in the sand-swept battles overseas. Leave no one behind. "Tell me what this is," Ghost said finally, his voice cutting the tension like a blade. He nodded at the folder, his grey eyes, scarred by years of squinting into sun-baked horizons, fixed on May. She lifted her head, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand, leaving a faint smear of red. "It's everything," she murmured, her accent soft but edged with steel. "Proof. My job at the county office. They were skimming funds for years, roads not built, schools forgotten. I found the ledgers, the emails. They know I have it." Riley nodded fiercely, her dark eyes mirroring her aunt's resolve. Aunt May wouldn't let them get away with it. "But they came to our house tonight, rough men, said if we talked we'd disappear." Ghost leaned against the bar, the wood cool under his palms. Disappear. The word hung heavy, conjuring images of shallow graves in the Badlands. Engines roaring away from unfinished business. He'd lost too many to that void, brothers in arms, a wife to the bottle after the war chewed him up. Iron Promise was his redemption, a family forged in chrome and loyalty, but it had kept him walled off from the world's pain. Until now, this wasn't just their fight, it was a call to the honor he'd buried under layers of cynicism. The first light of pre-dawn crept through the grimy windows, painting the room in hues of grey and gold. Outside, the wind died to a whisper, but Ghost knew the calm was fleeting. He'd have to wake the crew, rally the riders who'd sworn their lives to the promise. But first, he needed to understand the depth of this pit they were stepping into. "Names," he pressed, flipping open the folder with careful fingers. Pages rustled like dry leaves, revealing charts of diverted funds, signatures from officials he'd heard whispers about in dive bars, crooked commissioners, badge-wearers on the take. May recited them haltingly, her voice gaining strength with each word, the county head, a slick lawyer, even a sheriff's deputy with a grudge. Riley watched, her fear ebbing into quiet determination, as if sharing the burden made it lighter. Ghost absorbed it all, the pieces forming a web of greed that stretched from dusty town halls to the veins of the community. By the time the clock hit 2:00 a.m., the decision was made. He'd broken his code for a reason. Honor wasn't a rule to follow, it was a fire to stoke, even if it burned you down. As the clubhouse stirred with the first hints of activity, boots in the hall, murmurs from sleeping brothers, Ghost stood taller. This girl and her aunt had knocked on his door, and he'd answered. Now, the Iron Promise would ride not just for their own, but for the truth that could shatter empires. The desert awaited, vast and unforgiving, but in its silence, promises were born. And Ghost intended to keep this one, come hell or high water. The first rays of false dawn sliced through the clubhouse windows like hesitant blades, turning the haze of cigarette smoke into swirling ghosts. Asher, Ghost. Valente paced the length of the bar, his boots echoing softly against the scarred planks, each step a deliberate anchor against the rising tide in his gut. Mei Chen sat hunched over her water glass, the manila folder now splayed open before her like a battlefield map, its edges frayed from frantic handling. Riley perched on the stool beside her, knees drawn up, watching Ghost with eyes that held the quiet vigilance of someone who'd learned too young that trust was a gamble. The air hung thick with the scent of cooling coffee from the pot he'd brewed minutes ago, bitter grounding, a ritual to steady nerves before the storm broke. Ghost stopped pacing, his calloused hands gripping the bar's edge until the wood groaned under the pressure. He'd seen corruption before, back in the dust-choked valleys overseas. where promises of protection turned to ash under the weight of greed. A buddy's life traded for a politician's handshake, a village left to burn because the right palms weren't greased. That war had carved him hollow, leaving only the iron promise to fill the voids. Brothers who rode with you into the fire, no questions, no betrayals. But this folder wasn't just paper, it was a lit fuse. Names like Commissioner Hale and Deputy Harlan staring up at him, linked to siphoned funds that starved the very towns the club called home. Roads crumbling, kids without buses to school. If he turned away now, that fire would consume May and Riley without a flicker of remorse. "I can't promise it'll end pretty," Ghost said, his voice a low rumble, like thunder rolling distant over the Badlands. He met May's gaze, seeing the flicker of steel beneath her exhaustion, the same unyielding spark that had kept him alive through nights of endless patrols. "But iron promise doesn't leave folks hanging when the truth's on the line. We'll get you safe. Get this out there. My word on it." May's lips parted in a tremulous breath, her fingers tracing the folder's edge as if drawing strength from it. "You don't know us. Why risk?" "Because I've been the one run in once," Ghost cut in, softer now, the words pulling at scars he rarely touched. He glanced at Riley, her small face illuminated by the neon's glow, and saw echoes of his own lost niece, taken by a fever years back when the world was too busy with its own wars. Had a promise to a brother in the sand, said I'd watch his back, bring him home. Didn't. Cost him everything. Won't let that shadow touch you two. Riley's eyes widened, a spark of understanding bridging the gap between stranger and ally. She slid off the stool, stepping closer to Ghost, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're like the stories Aunt May tells, nights on bikes, fixing what's broken." May pulled her niece back gently, but the moment lingered, a fragile thread weaving them into the club's unspoken code. The back door creaked open then, heavy footsteps announcing Jack's Razor Thorn, the club's sergeant-at-arms, his broad frame filling the doorway like a wall of weathered oak. Razor rubbed sleep from his eyes, his salt-and-pepper beard unkempt, the iron promise patch on his cut gleaming faintly. Behind him trailed Lena Sparks Ruiz, the only sister in the inner circle, her dark hair tied back, tools still clipped to her belt from late-night tinkering on engines. They'd heard the murmurings, the unusual stir in the dead of night. Razor's gaze sharpened as it landed on the women, then the open folder. "Ghost, what's this mess you've dragged in before the coffee's even hot?" Ghost nodded them over, keeping his tone even as he recapped the night's intrusion. The girl's plea, the aunt's wounds, the documents painting a picture of rot at the county's core. Razor leaned in, flipping through pages with thick fingers, his face hardening like cooling steel. "Hale, that snake's been poisoning the well for years. Took my cousin's farm in a foreclosure that stank worse than roadkill." Sparks crossed her arms, her eyes flicking to May with a mix of wariness and empathy. She'd patched up enough strays in her time, veterans down on luck, kids fleeing bad homes, to recognize the desperation etched in May's posture. "We ride for our own," Razor growled, slamming the folder shut. "But this pulls us into the viper's nest. Badges, suits, they don't play fair. One wrong move, and we're all ghosts." Ghost felt the weight of that truth settle, like desert dust on his tongue. The club had danced on the edge before, busting a ring of smugglers preying on migrant families, standing down a corrupt developer who wanted to pave over sacred lands. But this hit closer, threads of greed tangling with the lives of folks who'd never revved an engine in their lives. He thought of the promise he'd just made, raw and untested, binding him not just to May and Riley, but to the fire of justice that burned hotter than any engine. "Then we make it right," he said, voice steady. "Call the others. Dawn ride. We get these two to the old safe house up in the hills, buy time to copy the files, get word to someone clean." Sparks nodded first, her loyalty a quiet flame. "I'll rig the bikes. Extra fuel, false plates, no tracks." Razor hesitated, then clapped Ghost on the shoulder, the gesture sealing the pact. As they moved to rouse the rest, engines coughing to life in the lot, murmurs turning to determined plans, the clubhouse pulsed with renewed purpose. May watched it unfold, Riley clinging to her side, the fear in their eyes softening into something like hope. Outside, the sky bled pink and orange, the desert awakening with the first bird calls. But Ghost knew the peace was illusion, tires on gravel in the distance, a trick of the wind or the first hounds on the scent. By 4:30 a.m., 8 riders gathered in the lot, Harleys lined like silent sentinels under the floodlights. Ghost helped Riley onto Sparks' bike, the girl's small hands gripping the leather seat, while May mounted behind Razor, the folder tucked into a saddlebag. Ghost swung onto his own iron horse, the key turning with a satisfying click, the engine's roar drowning out doubts. They peeled out in formation, dust clouds billowing like war banners, heading north into the rising sun. The road stretched endless, flanked by saguaros standing sentinel, their shadows long and watchful. But as they crested the first ridge, Ghost's mirror caught a glint, headlights far but closing. The chase had begun, and with it, the true test of the promise he'd broken his code to keep. The wind whipped through his hair, carrying the faint echo of Riley's earlier words, "Knights on bikes." Maybe she was right. In a world of broken oaths, this ride was redemption on 2 wheels, loyalty forged in the roar of the road. But the shadows behind them grew longer, and Ghost gripped the throttle tighter, knowing one wrong turn could bury them all. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The sun climbed higher, a relentless orb, turning the desert into a furnace of shimmering heat waves that distorted the horizon like a fever dream. Ghost led the convoy from the front, his Harley thundering beneath him, the vibration pulsing through his bones like a second heartbeat. The road twisted through canyons carved by ancient floods, red rock walls rising sheer on either side, their shadows offering fleeting respite from the glare. Behind him, the 7 bikes formed a tight wedge. Razor and May in the second slot, Sparks with Riley clinging to her back, the others fanned out like guardians in a forgotten saga. The air rushed past, thick with the tang of hot asphalt and exhaust, mingling with the earthy bite of creosote bushes lining the shoulders. No one spoke. Words were swallowed by the engine's growl, but the bond thrummed unspoken, a promise etched in the rhythm of their wheels. Ghost's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror every few seconds, tracking that distant glint of headlights that had haunted the ridge. At first, it could have been a mirage, a trick of the light bouncing off chrome, but now it sharpened, 2 sets, then 3, closing the gap with predatory intent. His grip tightened on the handlebars, leather gloves creaking, the old instincts from desert patrols kicking in, assess, adapt, endure. This wasn't some border skirmish with faceless foes. These were the hounds of Hale's empire, men who'd trade justice for a paycheck, their badges as hollow as the wind-scoured bluffs. The folder, now split between saddlebags, held the key, ledgers proving millions funneled into Ghost accounts, schools shuttered while mansions rose on stolen land. Exposing it meant dismantling the web, but first, survival. May leaned forward against Razor's back, her arms locked around his waist, the wind tearing at her hair like vengeful fingers. The bruises on her arms throbbed with each jolt of the bike, reminders of the men who'd cornered her in the county archives the night before, rough hands yanking files, threats hissed in the dim light of flickering fluorescence. She'd fought back, not with fists, but with copies slipped into her bag. A quiet rebellion, born from years of watching good people ground under bureaucratic heels. Riley, ahead with Sparks, buried her face against the woman's jacket, the roar of the engine a lullaby, masking her terror. The girl had seen too much already. Shadows at the window, her aunt's stifled cries, the frantic dash to the clubhouse under a moonless sky. But in this phalanx of leather and steel, she felt a flicker of the stories May told, tales of outlaws who bent the world right, one ride at a time. Razor glanced over his shoulder at Ghost, signaling with a nod toward the narrowing canyon ahead. The safe house was 10 miles out, a derelict cabin tucked in a box canyon, its location known only to the inner circle, a bolt hole from club runs gone sideways. Stocked with canned goods and a satellite phone buried under floorboards. But the pursuers were gaining, their vehicles kicking up dust plumes that stained the sky like blood in water. Ghost throttled down, the bike surging as he veered onto a side trail, gravel spitting under tires. The convoy followed, engines straining against the incline. The path roughening into a ribbon of rutted dirt, flanked by thorny mesquite. Here, the desert's beauty turned brutal. Jagged boulders loomed like silent judges, the sun baking the ground until it cracked like parched lips. Sparks pulled alongside Ghost for a moment, her voice cutting through the din via the comms mic clipped to her helmet. They're pushing SUVs. Probably county issue. No markings, but I smell feds in the mix. We lose 'em in the switchbacks? Her tone was steady, laced with the fire that had earned her the Sparks moniker, igniting solutions from the ashes of chaos. Ghost nodded, the wind masking his reply, but she read the plan in his posture. He gunned it again, leading them into the first hairpin turn, the bikes leaning low, tires kissing the edge, where a drop-off plunged into a dry wash. Riley let out a muffled yelp, but Sparks' hand reached back, squeezing the girl's knee, a silent vow that this family of riders wouldn't falter. The chase intensified as the canyon funneled them tighter, echoes of engines bouncing off the walls like war drums. One of the trailing vehicles, a black Tahoe, its grille gleaming menacingly, barreled closer, a figure in the passenger seat raising something that caught the light. A rifle? No, a camera perhaps, or worse, a scanner. Ghost's mind raced through the stakes. If they were caught with May and the files, it wouldn't be cuffs and questions. It'd be accidents in holding cells, whispers of resistance vanishing into the system. He'd broken his code for honor, but honor demanded more now, cleverty over brute force, loyalty over retreat. He signaled the split. Half the riders peel off to a decoy trail, drawing the heat, while the core group pushed for the safe house. Razor took the lead on the diversion, May protesting in his ear, but he shook his head. Trust the ride, ma'am. Ghosts got the rest. The bikes diverged with precision, dust clouds merging into a deceptive haze. Ghost, Sparks, and 2 others, veterans with scars matching his own, pressed on, the girl's small form a beacon of why they fought. The safe house emerged around a bend, its weathered siding blending with the rock face, a forgotten relic from mining days. They skidded to a halt in the shadow of an overhang, engines cutting to whispers as the distant roar of pursuit faded into the maze of trails. Inside, the air was cool and musty, smelling of aged timber and faint mildew. Ghost barred the door, his breath steadying as he turned to the group. Riley slid off the bike, legs wobbling, and ran to May, who dismounted from Razor's empty slot moments later. No, wait, Razor was on diversion, but the thought lingered like a ghost. Sparks busied herself with the files, spreading them on a rickety table lit by a single lantern. We copy what we can, beam it to a secure drop. But Hale's reach is long. We need allies outside the club. Ghost nodded, pouring water from a jug into dented mugs, the liquid splashing like a promise of pause. His eyes met May's, seeing the gratitude warring with guilt. This started with your door, she said softly, Riley nodding beside her. Now it's ours. He felt the weight of that shift, the code he'd shattered, forging something unbreakable, A family extended, a redemption claimed mile by mile. But outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the faint whine of engines circling back. The respite was brief. The real storm brewed, testing not just their speed, but the depth of oaths sworn in the dead of night. As the lantern flickered, casting long shadows across the maps and ledgers, Ghost traced a route on the worn paper, deeper into the hills, toward a journalist in the next county who'd owed the club a favor from a busted extortion racket years back. Loyalty's web extended far, threads of past promises pulling them forward. Riley watched, her fear tempered by awe, as the riders planned in hushed tones, the desert silence amplifying their resolve. This wasn't just escape. It was the first strike in a war for truth, where breaking one code birthed 100 more. And as the sun dipped toward noon, painting the canyon in fiery hues, Ghost knew the ride home would demand everything: honor, heart, and the unyielding roar of the iron promise. The lantern's flame danced erratically, throwing jagged shadows across the safehouse walls like fingers clawing at secrets. Dust motes swirled in the stale air, disturbed by the faint vibrations of engines echoing from the canyon's mouth. Distant now, but closing like a noose tightening around their necks. Ghost stood by the barred window, his silhouette framed against the slatted light, peering out at the labyrinth of red rock and twisted scrub. The desert sun beat down mercilessly, turning the air outside into a shimmering veil that blurred the line between safety and snare. Inside, the group huddled around the table, Sparks methodically scanning pages into a battered laptop, its fan whirring like a trapped insect, May clutching Riley close, the girl's head resting on her aunt's lap, both of them drawing strength from the quiet rhythm of shared breath. The other two riders, Tank, a mountain of a man with a prosthetic leg from the same war that haunted Ghost, and Lena's brother Marco, wiry and quick with a knife, flanked the door, hands resting on holsters, eyes sharp as coyote tracks. Ghost turned from the window, the floorboards creaking under his weight, each step a measured beat in the tense silence. The scent of old pine resin from the cabin's beams mingled with the acrid tang of gun oil and cooling engine parts dragged in from the bikes. He'd led them here on instinct, a bolt hole carved from the club's shadowed history, but now doubt gnawed at the edges of his resolve. Breaking his code had been the spark. This ride was the blaze, pulling Iron Promise into a fight against shadows deeper than any gang rivalry. Commissioner Hale's name loomed largest in the files, a silver-tongued viper who'd risen from small-town lawyer to puppet master, diverting funds meant for flood barriers while his cronies built lakeside retreats. Ghost had crossed paths with his type before, the suit who smiled while burying bodies under paperwork. But this hit the bone, kids like Riley going hungry while the powerful feasted. Honor demanded action, yet the cost whispered warnings, lost brothers, shattered oaths, a club torn asunder. Sparks looked up from the screen, her fingers pausing on the keys, the glow illuminating the faint scar across her cheek from a bar brawl turned betrayal. Copies are uploading to the Dropbox, encrypted, routed through 3 proxies. But if those SUVs sniff us out, we're cooked. Hale's got eyes everywhere. One leak, and this cabin's a tomb. Her voice was steady, but her eyes flicked to Riley, softening the edge. Sparks had her own ghosts, a sister lost to a corrupt foster system, promises broken by indifferent badges. This wasn't abstract. It was personal, a thread in the tapestry of loyalty that bound the club. May shifted, her voice emerging soft but threaded with iron, like rebar in concrete. You could leave us here, send the files alone. My fight. It's not yours to bleed for. Riley lifted her head, dark eyes pleading, her small fingers twisting the hem of her jacket. The girl had barely spoken since the ride, but her silence spoke volumes, the weight of a world that had already tried to crush her spirit. Ghost met May's gaze, seeing the mirror of his own buried pain, the wife who'd walked away after his discharge, unable to bridge the chasm of nightmares, leaving him with a promise unkept to build a life from ruins. "No," Ghost replied, the word landing heavy as a dropped wrench. He pulled a chair over, the scrape echoing like a challenge. "Opened that door back at the clubhouse, made it mine. Iron promise rides for the forgotten, vets without homes, towns choked by lies. Hale's poison spreads, we cut it out, or it festers." Tank grunted agreement from the doorway, his massive arms crossed, the prosthetic glinting dully. Marco nodded, slipping a burner phone from his pocket. "Calling the journalist now. Owens owes us. That tip on the land grab saved his paper from shutdown." The phone buzzed to life, Marco's low murmur cutting through the hush as he relayed coordinates and stakes. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters like impatient knuckles, carrying the faint growl of engines probing the trails. Ghost's pulse quickened, the old patrol rhythm syncing with his breath. Scan, signal, survive. He moved to the table, tracing the map with a scarred finger. Routes snaking through arroyos to a rendezvous point at dusk, where Owens could hand off the drive to bigger players, ones who wouldn't flinch at the truth. But ethics twisted like the canyon paths, expose Hale too soon, and the hounds swarm. Wait, and May and Riley become ghosts in the system. Riley stirred, her voice a tentative whisper that pierced the planning. "What if they find us first, like at home? The men with the lights." The room stilled, May's hand tightening on her niece's shoulder. Bruises hidden under long sleeves, but pulsing with memory. Signs of aggression from interrogations disguised as visits. Ghost knelt to her level, his leather creaking, the scent of road dust and resolve enveloping her. "They won't. Not while we're breathing. You hid your aunt, now we hide you both. That's the promise." Her eyes, wide and searching, held a spark of belief, fanning the fire in his chest. In that moment the club expanded, strangers woven into the serpent's coil, family chosen in the crucible of crisis. Sparks' laptop chimed, upload complete, and she pocketed the drive, her grin fierce. "Files are out. Now we move. Dust cover. Split the group again." The plan solidified. Tank and Marco draw any tails with a feint toward the highway, while Ghost, Sparks, May and Riley slip through the back trails to the meet. As they prepped, slinging packs and checking weapons, not for killing, but for the line they wouldn't cross, Ghost felt the shift. This wasn't vengeance. It was justice, poetic and unyielding, redeeming the code he'd broken by forging a stronger one. The engines outside grew louder, tires crunching gravel, but the cabin held its breath, a fortress of will. They slipped out the rear as shadows lengthened, bikes idling soft under the overhang. Ghost lifted Riley onto Spark's saddle, her small weight a reminder of stakes beyond ledges. May mounted behind him, her arms tentative around his waist, the folders echo in her grip. The canyon swallowed their departure, rock walls muffling the roar as they vanished into the maze. Behind, the pursuers circled the empty safe house, frustration mounting in radio static. But Ghost rode forward, the sun dipping low, painting the desert in crimson vows. Redemption wasn't a destination, it was the road itself, paved with loyalty's unbreaking promise. The journalist waited, truth's first ally, and with it, the unraveling of empires built on sand. If this chapter stirred something in you, the fire of standing firm against the shadows, hit that like button below. It fuels these stories of quiet courage and unbreakable bonds. The canyon's twists uncoiled like a serpent shedding skin, the dying light of dusk bleeding crimson across the jagged spires that clawed at the sky. Ghost throttled his Harley steady, the engine's low growl a counterpoint to the fading echoes of pursuit they'd left in the dust. May clung to his back, her arms a tentative vice around his midsection, the warmth of her body a stark contrast to the cooling desert air that rushed past like a sigh of relief. Her breath came even now, laced with the faint floral trace of her shampoo, a small anchor of normalcy amid the chaos. Behind them, Sparks rode point on the narrow trail, Riley's small form pressed against her, the girl's whispers lost to the wind, but her grip fierce, as if the bike were the only solid ground left. The other two, Tank and Marco, had peeled off hours ago on their diversion, their roars fading into the Badlands, buying this fragile window with their own risks. The path narrowed further, flanked by walls of rust-red sandstone etched with ancient petroglyphs, faded warriors on horseback, symbols of battles long buried under time's indifferent weight. Ghost's mind wandered to those carvings, much like the oaths that scarred his soul, promises etched deep. Surviving winds that eroded everything else. The war had taught him that. Brothers swearing brotherhood in foxholes, only to scatter like smoke when the shells stopped falling. Iron promise had rebuilt him, a family of outcasts riding against the tide. But tonight that family stretched thinner, encompassing May and Riley in its coil. He'd broken his code for them, trading isolation for entanglement, and now the honor of it pulled like a current, swift and unforgiving. Sparks signaled ahead, her tail light flashing in the gathering gloom, a lone mesquite grove marking the rendezvous point 2 miles out. The journalist, Elias Owens, waited there, a grizzled ink-slinger who'd traded barbs with the club over a decade ago when Iron Promise exposed a land scam threatening his town's water rights. Owens owed them, not in blood, but in truth. A debt of integrity in a world that peddled lies like cheap fuel. Ghost eased off the throttle, the bike's rumble softening to a purr as they crested a rise. Below, the arroyo floor stretched flat and shadowed, dotted with creosote bushes that whispered in the breeze, their resinous scent sharp against the metallic bite of exhaust. No sign of tails, but Ghost's instincts prickled. The desert played tricks, hiding threats in its vast silence. They dismounted in the grove, boots crunching on brittle twigs that snapped like brittle bones. Riley slid down first, her legs unsteady from the ride, dark eyes scanning the horizon with a mix of wonder and wariness. "Is he here? The one who'll make them stop?" she asked, voice small but threaded with hope, tugging at May's sleeve. May knelt beside her, brushing dirt from the girl's jacket, her own face drawn tight with the ghosts of what-ifs. The bruises had faded to dull shadows under the twilight, but the deeper marks, the fear of loss, the isolation of standing alone against giants, lingered like smoke. Soon, Riley, this man, he turns words into weapons, like your aunt's stories. Ghost scanned the tree line, his hand resting on the holster at his hip, not drawn but ready, a silent testament to the line they walked. Weapons for protection, never provocation. That was the club's creed, honed from too many close calls with badges that bent the wrong way. Sparks unpacked the drive from her saddlebag, its compact form heavy with the weight of ledgers and emails, proof of Hale's empire, funds siphoned from public coffers to line pockets, leaving communities cracked and parched. "Upload secure," she murmured, pocketing it again. "Owens gets this, runs the story, and the feds, the clean ones, will have to bite. But Hale's not done. He'll spin it, call us vigilantes." The air cooled rapidly, the sun's last embers dipping behind the ridges, painting the sky in streaks of bruised purple. A faint crunch of gravel announced Owens, before his silhouette emerged from the shadows, an older man in a faded denim jacket, salt and pepper hair tousled by the wind, carrying a battered satchel slung over one shoulder. His eyes, sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, flicked over the group with the assessing gaze of someone who danced with danger too often. "Valente," he greeted, voice gravelly from years of chain-smoking deadlines. "Heard you were stirring the pot. This the fire?" Ghost nodded, stepping forward, the leather of his cut creaking softly. "Bigger than that. Files got names. Hale, Harlan, the works, skimming from the bone-dry towns we ride through. These two—" He gestured to May and Riley, who stood a pace back, May shielding her niece like a human barrier. "Found it. Won't let it bury them." Owen's expression hardened as Sparks handed over the drive, his fingers closing around it like a vow. He glanced at the document's summary on his phone, the screen's glow illuminating lines of betrayal. Millions vanished, contracts rigged, lives upended for profit. May spoke then, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. It's not just money. It's promises broken, to families like mine, to the kids who deserve better. I copied what I could before they came. Please. Make it count, Riley peeked out, her curiosity overriding fear. Are you a knight too, like them? Owens chuckled softly, a sound like dry leaves kneeling to her level. Nah, kid, I'm the scribe, but knights need stories told right, or the world's none the wiser. The exchange hung in the balance, ethics twisting like the Arroyo's dry riverbed. Ghost felt the pull of doubt. Handing off the truth meant trusting an outsider, risking the club's exposure in a system rotten at the core. What if Owens buckled under pressure, or Hale's reach snuffed the story before it breathed? But loyalty demanded the leap. Iron Promise had thrived on such gambles, redeeming past failures with present courage. You run it clean, Ghost said, his tone low and unyielding. No half measures. We ride cover if it blows back. Owens nodded, slipping the drive into his satchel. My word, this hits the wire by morning. Front page, no holds barred. Hale's house of cards crumbles, or I'm not Elias Owens. He paused, eyes lingering on Riley and May. Get them clear. The hounds will bay louder now. As he melted back into the shadows, engine of his old pickup coughing to life in the distance, the group remounted, the air charged with the electric hum of momentum. But as they fired up the bikes, a low rumble echoed from the east. Not wind, but tires on hardpan, headlights piercing the dusk like accusatory eyes. Two vehicles, silhouettes bulky against the fading light, vectors closing fast. Sparks cursed under her breath, revving her engine. They looped us. Diversion bought time, not escape. Ghost's heart thudded, the promise he'd staked everything on now, a beacon drawing wolves. He gunned the throttle, May tightening her hold, Riley's cry swallowed by the roar. The Arroyo became a gauntlet, rocks blurring as they fled, the chase reigniting with feral intensity. In that blur of speed and shadow, Ghost glimpsed redemption's edge, not in victory, but in the unbreaking chain of those who'd chosen to stand. The road ahead forked into uncertainty, but the iron promise thundered on, honor's fire undimmed by the gathering night. The Arroyo's walls closed in like the jaws of some ancient beast, the dying light fracturing into shards of amber that danced across the sheer rock faces. Ghost leaned into the turn, his Harley slicing through the narrow channel, the engine's bellow echoing off the stone in a thunderous chorus that drowned out everything but the pounding of his pulse. May pressed against his back, her arms locked tight, her breath hot and ragged against his shoulder, carrying the faint salt of tears unshed. The wind clawed at them, whipping dust into stinging veils that blurred the path ahead, a treacherous ribbon of hardpan pocked with boulders like scattered teeth. Behind, Sparks and Riley fought to keep pace, the girls' muffled sobs cutting through the comms like fragile knives, while the pursuing SUVs roared closer, their headlights carving predatory beams through the gloom. Ghost's mind raced faster than the bike, fragments of the handover replaying, Owens's satchel vanishing into the night, the drive's weight lifting like a curse partially broken. But freedom was illusion. Hale's hounds had anticipated the play, their vehicles, sleek county beasts with reinforced grills, barreling through the mesquite without mercy. No sirens yet, just the raw hunger of men who'd traded oaths for overtime. Their badges glinting like false stars. Ghost signaled Sparks via the hand mirror, a sharp flick toward a side cut, a faint game trail veering into a slot canyon, barely wide enough for bikes. It was a gamble. Tighter confines might shake the tails, but one misstep meant tumbling into the abyss, bones shattering on unforgiving stone. "Stay close!" Ghost barked into the mic, his voice gravel over the din. Sparks nodded, her taillight bobbing as she accelerated, Riley's small frame a shadow of determination against her. The Arroyo forked violently, and Ghost veered left, tires skidding on loose gravel that sprayed like shrapnel. The first SUV followed, its bulk scraping the walls with a metallic screech, headlights sweeping wildly. A shot cracked, not aimed to kill, but to terrify, ricocheting off rock in a high whine that sent Riley screaming. May gasped, her nails digging into Ghost's ribs through leather, a sharp reminder of the lives tethered to his choices. This chase wasn't just evasion, it was the crucible, testing the promise he'd forged in the clubhouse's dim light. Honor over isolation, family extended beyond blood. The slot canyon swallowed them whole, the sky narrowing to a jagged slit overhead, stars pricking through like hesitant witnesses. The air grew cooler, laced with the mineral tang of damp earth hidden in crevices, a stark contrast to the furnace they'd fled. Ghost downshifted, the bike protesting with a guttural whine, navigating the squeeze where walls brushed his handlebars, scraping paint like accusatory fingers. Sparks pulled even, her face pale under the helmet's visor, eyes fierce. They're bottlenecked, buying seconds, but Riley's shaking bad. We can't run forever. The girl clung like a burr, her whispers frantic. Aunt May, they're gonna get us. May reached back in her mind's eye, but the distance between bikes was a chasm, bridged only by the invisible thread of trust. Ethics clawed at Ghost as he rode, the moral weight heavier than the saddlebags. Handing the files to Owens was justice's first arrow, but what if it pierced the wrong hearts? Hale's web ensnared innocence, families like May's displaced by rigged bids, veterans like Tank denied aid while funds vanished into ether. Iron Promise had always walked the edge, meeting poetic retribution, exposing smugglers, shielding the vulnerable without spilling blood. But tonight, the line blurred. A second shot pinged closer, shattering a chunk of overhang that rained pebbles like brittle warnings. Ghost's code, once unbreakable, had shattered for this, yet doubt whispered. Was he dragging his brothers into a grave for strangers' truths? No. Loyalty wasn't selective. It was the fire that redeemed the hollowed-out soul he'd carried since the war, since promises turned to dust in foreign sands. They burst from the slot into a wider basin, moon-silvered and ringed by saguaros, standing sentinel, their arms outstretched like pleas to the indifferent night. Ghost gunned it across the flat, the bikes kicking up moonlit dust that glowed ethereal. The lead SUV emerged coughing rocks, but the second hung back, perhaps radioing ahead, weaving a net wider than this canyon. Sparks veered toward a cluster of boulders, dismounting in a fluid motion, pulling Riley down and into cover. Ghost followed, skidding to a halt, engine ticking as it cooled. May slid off, legs buckling, and scooped her niece into a fierce embrace, the two of them a huddled island amid the storm. "Shh, we're okay," May murmured, though her voice cracked, the scent of her fear mingling with the desert's night-blooming jasmine, a fragile beauty in the peril. Ghost crouched low, scanning the basin's rim, the moon casting long shadows that played tricks on the eyes. "We hold here, let 'em pass. Tank and Marco should link up soon, draw 'em east." His words were steady, but inside the psychological siege raged, visions of lost brothers, the war's endless patrols where hesitation cost everything. Sparks checked her peace, a compact guardian against the encroaching dark, while Riley peeked out, her face streaked with dust and resolve. "You promised," she said softly, eyes locking on Ghost's. Like the night's, it hit him like a throttle twist, that child's faith, pure as unscarred chrome, binding him tighter than any club oath. Redemption wasn't solitary. It bloomed in these moments, chosen family standing against corruption's tide. The SUVs crested the rim, engines snarling but hesitated, lights sweeping the basin without committing. Static crackled over comms. Tank's voice, rough as sandpaper. "Diversion holding, feds in the mix now, clean badges maybe, pushing 'em your way." Ghost's jaw set, the ethical fork sharpening. Fight or fade? Violence was the easy path, but Iron Promise chose the harder, truth over triggers, lealtad enduring. He nodded to Sparks, who fired a warning shot skyward, the crack splitting the night like judgment. The vehicles swerved, tires spinning futilely, buying precious minutes. As the distant roar faded, Ghost rose, helping May to her feet, Riley sandwiched between them. The basin fell silent save for the wind's hush through cactus spines, a momentary breath before the next gale. They'd shaken the immediate hounds. But Hale's empire wouldn't crumble with one drive. It demanded more. Witnesses, pressure, the unyielding roar of exposure. Ghost mounted up, the group reforming in the moon's glow, bikes humming back to life. The road out twisted north, toward a secondary safe house where the club waited, reinforcements swelling the ranks. But as they rode into the velvet dark, Ghost felt the promise evolve. Not just protection, but legacy, a stand against the cynical world, where one broken code birthed unbreakable bonds. The stars wheeled overhead, vast and unblinking, bearing witness to the ride that would redefine them all. The moon hung low and bloated over the Badlands, its silver light pooling in the arroyo's dry veins like spilled mercury, turning the saguaros into spectral guardians with arms raised in silent oath. Ghost urged his Harley forward, the engine's steady thrum a heartbeat against the night's chill, weaving through the basin's scattered boulders that loomed like forgotten altars. May held on from behind, her grip loosening slightly now, the tension in her body easing into wary exhaustion, her cheek pressed against the worn leather of his cut. The scent of her, faint jasmine undercut by the sharp bite of adrenaline sweat, mingled with the desert's nocturnal perfume. Cool earth, blooming night flowers, and the oily residue of the chase clinging to their clothes. Sparks rode parallel, Riley's small form nestled secure against her, the girl's breathing syncing with the bike's rhythm. A fragile lullaby in the wake of terror. The pursuing SUVs had veered off, their roars swallowed by the canyon's maw, but Ghost knew the reprieve was thin as canyon wind. Hale's network pulsed with unseen eyes, radios crackling orders from distant command posts. Tank's voice had faded from the comms after the warning shot, but the promise lingered. Reinforcements en route. The club's full weight shifting to cover their flank. Iron Promise wasn't just riders. It was a vow incarnate, forged in the fires of shared scars. Veterans like Ghost, mechanics like Sparks, all bound by the serpent patch that symbolized unbreakable coils. Tonight, that coil encircled May and Riley, strangers elevated to kin through one cracked door at 1:16 a.m. The trail climbed gradually, shedding the arroyo's confines for open scrubland where the horizon stretched infinite, stars wheeling overhead in indifferent splendor. Ghost's thoughts drifted to the war's end, the day he'd buried his last promise under desert sand. A brother's dog tags clutched in blooded hands, whispers of "Bring me home" echoing unanswered. That hollow had birthed his code, walls up, messes out. But Riley's plea had breached them. Her aunt's folder a mirror to the corruptions he'd fled overseas, leaders skimming lives for ledgers, leaving the ground troops to rot. Exposing Hale wasn't vengeance, it was poetic justice. Truth's quiet thunder rolling over the powerful, redeeming the overlooked with the weight of unyielding honor. Sparks pulled alongside at a straightaway, her voice cutting through the mic with crisp urgency. Secondary safe house 2 miles north, Razors meeting us with the van. Clean plates, stocked for a night. Owens texted, stories locked, hits at dawn. Feds are circling Hale already, clean ones, not his puppets. The words landed like rain on parched soil, hope flickering in the dark. May leaned forward, her breath warm on Ghost's neck. It's over. They can't touch us now. Her voice carried the tremor of disbelief, the moral victory dawning slow after nights of shadows and rough hands. Riley piped up from Sparks' bike, her tone brighter, edged with the resilience of youth. like the knights winning the tale. Aunt May, we did it. Ghost allowed a ghost of a smile, the wind stripping it away as quickly as it formed. Not one yet, but the tide's turning. Hale's empire crumbles when the light hits those files, funds for roads that never built, schools shuttered for slush accounts. Folks like you two, you lit the match. The road roughened into a gravel wash, tires humming over loose stones that pinged like distant gunfire, the air cooling to a crisp bite that nipped at exposed skin. In the distance, headlights bobbed. Friendly now, Razor's van lumbering into view, its bulk a beacon of sanctuary. The convoy merged seamlessly, bikes flanking the vehicle as it slowed, doors grinding open to reveal the club's inner circle. Weathered faces lit by dashboard glow, nods of solidarity passing like silent handshakes. They piled in under the cover of a rocky outcrop, engines cutting to murmurs, the van's interior smelling of stale coffee and machine oil, a mobile fortress rigged with blackout curtains and a jury-rigged jammer. Razor clapped Ghost on the back, his beard flecked with road dust, eyes gleaming with the fire of the ride. Heard the play. Tank and Marco shook the last tails. They're looping back. Clubs mobilizing full. 20 riders by morning. Escort to the border town if needed. But Owens's peace. It'll bury Hale deeper than a Badlands grave. May settled Riley on a bench seat, wrapping her in a wool blanket that smelled of pine and past adventures. The girl's eyelids drooping as safety enveloped her like a long-denied embrace. Sparks busied herself with the laptop, confirming the upload's echoes rippling through secure channels. While Ghost leaned against the van's side, the metal cool under his palm. As the van rumbled north, the group fell into quiet vigil, the desert's vastness unfolding beyond the windows like a canvas of redemption. Ghost watched May murmur to Riley, stories of knights and promises, weaving a new tapestry over old fears. The girl's laughter a soft spark in the dimness. May's bruises fading not just in body but in spirit. This was the chosen family's alchemy, turning isolation into alliance, code breaking into legacy. Hale's downfall would come not with guns blazing, but with headlines shattering illusions, justice moral and unassailable, forcing the corrupt to face the truths they'd buried. Dawn crept in hesitant fingers of rose and gold, painting the eastern sky as the van crested a final ridge. Below, the secondary safe house nestled in a hidden valley, a sturdy ranch house flanked by outbuildings, iron promises hidden heart, where generations of riders had mended more than machines. They rolled to a stop, the air alive with the first bird calls and the promise of day. Ghost stepped out first, boots sinking into dew-kissed earth, the scent of sage rising fresh and forgiving. The club emerged, a phalanx of loyalty. As word spread, the story broke online, viral whispers turning to roars, Hale's name trending, resignations tumbling like dominoes, clean investigators swarming the county offices. May stood beside him, Riley at her side, the folder's ghost finally laid to rest. "You saved us," she said simply, her eyes reflecting the sunrise's warmth. Ghost shook his head, the weight lifting like morning mist. "We saved each other. Promise kept." In that moment, redemption settled deep, not as an end, but a beginning. The iron promise coiling stronger, ready for the next call in the night. The desert wind sighed approval, carrying their story into the light, where honor rode eternal. Thank you for riding along on this journey of unbreakable promises and chosen bonds. If these tales of quiet courage touch your heart, please subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll keep the stories coming, one chapter at a time.